Hi there. Unit 5 takes us through growth and development. It corresponds with Chapter 18 in your text, and that, of course, will be the recommended reading for this section. I've got listed here, this is mini lecture 1, but I do believe we'll get this entire section wrapped into just one segment here. So when we talk about some introductory things here, of course, it's really important for us to understand the growth and development phase. While we will appear to not really give it much dedication in the course, clearly this stage of development from the prenatal time all the way through growth and development of young stock is exceedingly important into their adult life productivity. And so we need to have a pretty good handle on how we can affect growth and development effectively so that your livestock, your conservation species, any of those kinds of things have the opportunity to grow into healthy and productive adults. So when we talk about growth, again, here we're just defining this as increase in size and body weight. Development includes all those other kind of things. It does include growth itself, but it also includes cellular differentiation when we talk about the prenatal time frame, changes in shape and form and so forth. So there's a number of different things that are going to be included in that as well. In the prenatal sense, we're going to talk about 3 phases: the sex cell phase, the embryo phase, and the fetal phase. But there are marked changes. There's a lot of different things going on during that prenatal period, but tends to follow the order that's listed here. The central nervous system is really what develops first, or the CNS. Then you start to see internal organs and bone structure begin to form. And then moving down all the way through, the last couple things that form is we start to get some intramuscular fat. Once we have muscle developed, we start to get some intramuscular fat or intermuscular fat. Consequently, then, to kind of wrap up, you get a little bit of subcutaneous fat. We also call that brown fat at times. And in newborn livestock, a newborn companion animals, that brown fat is really, really important because that's what they will use as an energy source until they're able to nurse or consume food early on. And so therefore, if they happen to burn through all that, then they're at significant risk for not making it in that early life time frame. That's why the importance of getting colostrum in the young stock is so important right away, right off the bat. So the first 2/3 of the gestational period in the prenatal time frame, we're talking about what we call hyperplasia. Here's where we're increasing the number of muscle fibers. This is one of the few times that actually happens, where we start to add muscle fiber and add muscle ability to build muscle. The last third of gestation then is a phase of what we call hypertrophy, where we're now increasing the size of those muscle fibers. We're adding cellular tissue there. And fetal development can get exponential in that last third of gestation. I think we'll see a chart of that here coming up. Just a slide here, a diagram of how development proceeds from the sex cell through the zona pellucida, which is just a cluster of cells as it gets going in an internal mass, what we call a trophoblast, and then moving through all the way to where we now have a fetus developing there on the bottom right-hand corner. Here is that slide that I was referencing, a chart. So notice if we just talk about, for example, a calf, that 9-month development phase. Notice the length in inches is somewhat a linear line. It starts out, at the conception there and just kind of proceeds nicely at a steady increase in terms of length all the way up to that birth length, which is about 40 inches in most calves, or somewhere around that category. But notice how weight is almost flatline. Doesn't hardly change until you see month 4. Now you start to see a little bit of an increase, and from month 4 to month 7, it's kind of a nice linear line. It's steep, but it's not incredibly steep compared to when you look at, say, month 6.5 to 7, and now you see exponential growth, almost a straight up line. It's incredible how quickly the fetus grows in that last third of the gestational period. Let's transition then, talk about, we assume that we've done well in growing a good, sound, and healthy fetus. Let's talk about birth or parturition. The number of muscle fibers is basically set at birth. So all the muscle, in terms of total muscle mass, is pretty much set. The number of muscle fibers are set at birth. Now we can increase the size of those fibers and the total mass of those fibers, and that's what accounts for growth, and that's how an animal does in fact grow. But birth weight is about 5 to 7% of an actual animal's mature weight. And the same thing with length, they're about 60% of their mature length. So when you put it in that context, we say an animal grows a lot, which they do, but they're actually much farther along than we expect them to be. Wither height, for example, in lambs or pigs is about 50% of mature height. So they're already halfway there to their mature height when they're born. Hip and chest width is about 1/3 of mature size. Now, all these things can be influenced in a number of different factors, whether it's nutritionally, health perspectives, what environment you have them in, and so forth. So certainly we can exceed these things, or we can fall short of those marks, dependent upon how we treat them. When you talk poultry, of course, then a little bit different, of course, species. The blastoderm of the egg is really what develops into the chick embryo. You can kind of see that little eye that will develop there. And that incubation environment should be pretty closely contained right around 100 degrees, with about a 60 to 75% relative humidity is the key. And a good incubator turns the egg about every 8 hours, somewhere between 1 and 8 hours. And there should be adequate level of oxygen. Don't forget that that eggshell needs to breathe a little bit. Again, a slide here that just kind of walks you through what that development phase may in fact look like. So let's transition then, talk about some basic animal anatomy and physiology. Of course, from the skeletal structure, this of course gives you your basic shape and form and is the protection for most of your vital organs. It's a storehouse for a lot of minerals, namely calcium. You need to have good calcium storage in your bones because there'll be times when you need it. And chicken bones are, of course, a little bit different. They're hollow, more brittle, and therefore it makes them lighter so that they can, most of them fly. Now, I'm not going to require you to be able to name all the bones or the skeletal sections like was what in the diagram, but just a good diagram to reinforce what we're talking about, skeletal. From the muscular system, 3 main different muscle categories that we need to focus on. First is skeletal muscle, and this is the largest component of muscle in the body and connects the bone to the rest of the body, to be honest with you, and provides for movement. Then we have the smooth muscle category, which is your digestive tract, the reproductive tract, and the urinary tracts, all very smooth and pliable muscle. And then finally the cardiac muscle type, which is of course much more specialized tissue and primarily is just your heart tissue. Here's again nothing that I'm going to make you memorize or even ask an assessment question on, but here are the technical terms for all the different muscle categories, muscle sections of a steer. From a basic anatomy and physiology, continuing here, the role or what's the job of the muscle, and it is to convert chemical energy into mechanical energy. So the chemical energy that we're feeding in your ration, whatever water that they drink, its job is then to convert that into something that then we can move, to make that horse be able to go into a good canter or lope, or allow that ewe to move through the pasture. Now, the performance depends upon power, strength, and endurance, which are listed here. Of course, power is the amount of work. The strength is the result of the muscle size. So the more contractible and the more flexible and the more mass that you have, the more strength that's there. And then the endurance is, of course, the length of time the muscle can work without becoming tired or fatigued. So all 3 of those things are really, really important. Now, we don't often think about cows or pigs needing, excessive power, strength, and endurance, but they all need significant amounts of that because they have to be able to endure their production systems, however that may be. The circulatory system then, of course, is your arterial and vein network, transporting oxygen, nutrients, waste, hormones, among a number of other different things through the bodily system. And especially when we talk about just an example for milk producing cattle, it takes about 400 to 500 pounds of blood flow through the mammary gland to make a pound of milk. And just I like to use that example because it gives you a very vivid picture of how much blood is important to basic bodily function. Endocrine system is next, and we're just going to boil that down and talk about just different hormones and chemical systems that impact virtually all bodily tissues in some form or fashion. We're going to focus on some of the endocrine system and hormone function in some later units and make sure and come back and revisit those important things. So growth curves are a pretty key feature to understand in terms of evaluating how your animal is progressing. Most early growth occurs in that linear fashion when we talk about baby calves or baby pigs. As puberty is reached, then that rate of growth tends to decline somewhat or plateau. And true growth really ceases at maturity, whatever age that might be. And for fattened animals, the increase in weight is really not true growth. It's not really a net. There's no net increase in bodily protein. It's just an increase of the mass of the muscle fiber sizes. So carcass composition, we've kind of already talked about this, so I'm not going to belabor that point much more, and I want to get this wrapped up here a little bit. But I will drop to the bottom of the slide and tell you a little bit about heifers, the effect of gender. So heifers, females deposit fat a little bit different than steers and bulls, and so if you have heifers in your feedlot, they're going to go to slaughter. They probably should be slaughtered a little bit sooner for optimum carcass quality. Now, some won't necessarily do that, but actually the opposite is true in swine. Barrows deposit fat a little bit sooner than gilts. So now, are they separated by gender in pig farms? Maybe some do, but some do not. They're all mixed in there. But to wrap up this section, I want to talk about calculating average daily gain, and I go through an example here. You can pause the conversation here and go through the math, and I won't lead you through that. I want to talk about it's important to understand how to calculate average daily gain and why it's critical. So especially with our meat-producing species, efficiency is the name of the game. And being able to understand how quickly your animals are growing, and if you are meeting what would be considered a normal average daily gain or a targeted average daily gain, you can only do that by actually collecting some data, weighing animals, feeding them, weighing them again, and dividing that difference over the growth period. That's really critical in tracking the effectiveness of your ration and your management program. So make sure that you understand how to calculate average daily gain, and we will go through some examples in class. Here's some good example of growth curves that I kind of alluded to earlier. Again, I'll let you pause the slideshow and look at those if you want to study them more carefully. Same thing with frame sizes with regard to weight and gain in cattle. So some take-home messages as we get this one wrapped up. Again, it's super crucial to understand growth and development because it's key to managing your livestock operation. You can't make big effective changes in adults if you have a real hole in your operation with young stock. It's easily influenced positively and negatively by the management choices that you make. And then making those correct managerial adjustments absolutely impacts efficiency and profitability. So down the line, that will pay back if you invest in it early on. We can talk about more specifics in class. Thanks for tuning into this section. I look forward to our discussion.